Here are three sizes of bandsaws from Rikon: the 10-inch, the 14-inch, and the 18-inch. Now, Rikon makes a lot of different bandsaws, but these are the ones that you would typically find in a workshop. I've been using these three off and on for a bit in my own workshop, and I thought I'd take this opportunity to show them all to you, to compare and contrast some of the size and features so you can get a sense for them and see if one of them might be right in your workshop. Now, if you're interested in a more in-depth view of any one of these saws, Highland Woodworking already has individual videos for each of these that goes through the unboxing and setup and initial tune-up of the saw itself. I'm just going to go through a brief overview of each of the models, but especially compare and contrast the size and features that you would find in these three different bandsaws. Now, the first thing you notice is the size difference between these three saws. But it's not just the size, it's the physical characteristics of each saw really scale up as you go from smaller to larger saws. For instance, on this 10-inch benchtop model, the 10 inches means it's got about 10 inches of clearance from the blade to the throat, which would limit the width of your cut. It's got a relatively small tabletop. It does sit on the bench, and it's got about 5 inches of resaw capacity and a 1/3 horsepower motor. Now, when we step up to a 14-inch bandsaw, now we've got obviously a much larger physical size of a saw. It sits on the floor on a stand. The 14 inches means you got about 14 inches from blade to the throat. This one has a 13-inch resaw capacity, which is really large for a 14-inch bandsaw. And it also has a 1.5 horsepower motor. So we're stepping up all these characteristics from the smaller saw to the 14-inch saw. And again, that's true up to this 18-inch saw. Now we've got 18 inches of width from our blade back to the throat, which gives a large capacity for larger work pieces. And in fact, the tabletop is larger to support those larger work pieces. We've got 12 inches of resaw capacity paired with a 2.5 horsepower motor. So much larger, more powerful motor, more mass in the wheels. Everything is physically bigger here with this saw. Now, I did mention that the 14-inch actually has a larger resaw capacity here than the 18-inch, even though the motor is a little bit smaller. So you do have to be careful when you're comparing features across bandsaws. Make sure that you're looking at all the different features. And although the physical resaw of this is higher, remember that the motor is a little bit less powerful than this larger motor, and that can affect the type of cuts that we can make. So let me go ahead and give you an overview of each of the models and show you some of the features and what I really like about each of them, and tell you how I would use them in my shop. So this is a benchtop bandsaw from Rikon, model 305, and it's got everything that you typically find in bandsaws: upper and lower wheels, upper and lower bearing guides, tabletop that tilts, everything that's typical of a bandsaw. At first I was like, that's a really cute bandsaw, but honestly this thing is great and super useful. Anytime I found myself wanting to do something quickly, whether it was a curve or a resaw, I would go right over to this bandsaw, flip it on, cut it out, and I was good to go. I love that it was set up ready to use. I also love the height of this, especially for smaller work pieces. The height is right here where I'm working. It's not down at my bench top, it's right up here. So I can manipulate those smaller pieces and get right in and see exactly what I'm doing, which is a really big benefit. This saw is obviously very useful for people who have a small workshop. You can take this and put it away somewhere and just pull it out when you need it and stick it right on the bench. I also recommend this saw for if you're doing smaller work. I love the height of the table for getting into those smaller pieces. I think it's a really useful size for working on smaller things. You still have a pretty decent resaw capacity, so if your work pieces do get bigger now and then, you can still handle that. But especially if you're working in stock, plywood, MDF, 3/4 stock, and your pieces aren't too large, this guy is great for quickly working through that material. I would also consider this bandsaw even if you already have a bandsaw in your shop. By having one bandsaw set up for resawing and straight cutting and another one set up ready for everyday tasks and curve cutting, you can really save a lot of time by not having to switch out those blades and retune up a bandsaw. I know some shops have a big 18-inch saw for the straight and resaw cutting and a 14-inch for more of the everyday, but I've been really impressed with this 10-inch saw. Now, having a second bandsaw in a shop is a luxury, but at this price point, it might be one that you can afford. Now, a 14-inch bandsaw is a very typical bandsaw in a workshop, and there's a reason for that. It's super versatile, being able to do curve cutting and resawing. In fact, I think stepping up to a larger model really only gets you the capability of moving stock a little bit faster and a little bit larger capabilities. Most everything I find I can do on the 14-inch, you don't really have to go to a larger saw. This guy can handle pretty much everything. Now, this is model 10325 from Rikon, and it has a huge resawing capacity right out of the box. 13 inches of resaw capacity paired with a 1.5 horsepower motor. The only thing is you might be going a little bit slower feeding stock through this size saw versus a larger saw. It's got all the typical features of a 14-inch bandsaw. One thing that I really love are the micro adjustments on the bearings on this 14-inch bandsaw. They're really nice and very easy to use. What's best about this saw is its versatility. You have a lot of resaw capacity and a good amount of curve cutting capacity with a decent size, pretty large size tabletop for handling those workpieces. It's a little bit obviously much bigger than the 10-inch model for physical size in your workshop. It does go all the way to the floor with the stand, so it takes up more room, but you get a lot more versatility with it. Now, this huge guy is just awesome for chewing through material. This is Rikon's Model 10345 18-inch bandsaw, 18 inches of width with a 2.5 horsepower motor and 12 inches of resaw capacity. Not only because of the motor, but also the mass of these wheels, really turning that blade and putting that mass into this spinning blade. I find I can push stock through here really quickly and still get a nice smooth surface. It also really helps to have an extra large tabletop for handling much larger work pieces, whether I'm doing flat stuff and curve cutting or for doing resawing. Having a larger surface really helps with that. The other nice thing about this large saw is that everything's physically a little bit bigger, which makes it easier to adjust. The bearings are bigger, the guides are bigger, so everything is a little bit easier to get your hands in there and micro adjust everything that needs tuning on a larger saw. The downside is that this saw is huge. It takes up a lot of space in the workshop. And also, you don't necessarily get a whole lot of more features from this saw than you do from the 14-inch. As I mentioned earlier, I can pretty much do everything on the 14-inch that I can do on here. Here I can just do it a little bit faster and have a little bit larger tabletop for handling pieces. So those are the three most common sizes of bandsaws produced by Rikon. And I have no problem recommending any of these three. They all work really well. They've got all the adjustments for tuning up the saw. They're easy to assemble and get up and running into your shop. Now, when you're looking across bandsaws, make sure you know what kind of things that you want to be doing with them. The 14-inch is the most versatile from sort of a price performance perspective. You can certainly do a lot of curve cutting and resawing with the 14-inch. But I was really impressed with the 10-inch and its capabilities for quickly just banging out some curves or doing smaller pieces and having that height a little bit taller for those smaller pieces, being able to see them. And of course, the 18-inch is just awesome for powering through material. You can move things a little bit faster and you can use larger work pieces on a saw that is bigger. So make sure you know what kind of features that you want in your shop when you're looking across these bandsaws. Now, one thing to note is that manufacturers are really pushing a lot of features into this 14-inch umbrella. The 14-inch models by a lot of different manufacturers run the gamut of price and features, so make sure you know what you're comparing when you're looking at that. For instance, this model here has a 13-inch resaw capacity, a really high resaw capacity for a 14-inch bandsaw. So when you're looking specifically at the 14-inch bandsaws, make sure you really know what the features are that you're comparing. So I hope this video has shown you the relative sizes and given you a bit of a view of the features and capabilities of these saws compared to each other. All these saws are great saws. It's just a matter of figuring out which one, or two, or three makes sense for your shop.